Uh-oh.
Okay, we'll start with this. A question from Boxing Scene at year's end. Was 2024 a good year for boxing? The Boxing Scene verdict is in. And in the article, the editorial panel discussed whether or not they think it's been a good year for boxing. Here,
Got Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson on the screen.
what was a very, very big event within the boxing sphere, though I wouldn't use that event specifically to gauge whether or not boxing had a good year. But I would say it has been. On the women's side, we got to see Michaela Mayer versus Natasha Jonas, Michaela Mayer versus Sandy Ryan.
Got to see an undisputed champion crowned in the women's minimum weight division when Senicia Estrada took on Yo Costa Valle.
Another one in the women's flyweight division, the inaugural flyweight undisputed champion Gabby Fundora.
She fought Gabrielle Alanis.
Taylor versus Serrano 2, their big rematch. Sky Nicholson's showdown with Raven Chapman. And all of the smaller fights in between. I'd say it's been a good year for the women. I'd say it's been a good year for the men. We got to see Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk. Not once, but twice. We got to see...
And that was for undisputed.
The first undisputed heavyweight champion in something like 25 years, maybe more, in the heavyweight division.
Yeah.
In the light heavyweight division.
When's the last time you saw an undisputed champion at light heavyweight before this year? We finally got to see Benavidez versus Bivol, and we're going to get to see it again very soon.
Very big fight across the pond. A very big fight, very big upset in the Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois fight. That was a big show. That was a big fight, and that was a very big upset.
I think it's been a good year. I think it's been a good year all around.
Smaller fights that were also entertaining, like Luis Lopez versus Angelo Leo, Virgil Ortiz versus Sergey Bohachuk, Bam Rodriguez versus Francisco Gallo Estrada.
I think it's been a good year. I think it's been a good year all around for the women, for the men, for the sport. Relationships were formed that will pave the way for a new era in the coming year. Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren will be working together. Frank is migrating over from BT Sport to DAZN.
The presence of Riyadh season was felt within the boxing sphere the entire calendar year, ensuring that the biggest of the big fights happen, and they happen in a timely fashion, with little wait, ensuring that the boxing fans essentially get what they're asking for.
I think it's been a good year. If I have to recap the year in boxing in 2024, we got a lot of big fights, a lot of meaningful fights, and there are that many more to come.
Ring Magazine was purchased by His Excellency Turki El Sheikh, who has stated he plans to run a card in London and in the United States separate from Riyadh season to promote Ring Magazine. He says a subscription to the magazine would be required to watch those events.
Ring Magazine was resurrected. What was once deemed the Bible of boxing got a shot in the arm this year.
I think it was a very big year within the world of boxing, though for some, the focus is a lot more specific to the United States. And I can say that for the United States, it wasn't that big a year. Not for the Americans and not for American fighters.
American boxing. The presence of Riyadh season was felt throughout the entire calendar year with the withdrawal of American boxing, that this is seeming less and less like the hub for boxing.
Continued gripes about the atmosphere, quote unquote, at Riyadh season shows that the crowd just isn't as lively as what you would get in America, though if the crowd in America were as lively as they're made out to be, Fox and Showtime would have never walked away from the sport.
ESPN wouldn't be thinking about doing the same thing.
When you surmise the year in boxing and the shift in the axis of power, where the money's coming from and where the big fights are, where the big fights are happening, if America were everything some content creators and some nationalistic fans make it out to be, you would have seen an investment from the American broadcasters, from the American networks, that if they want boxing on their platform, they're going to pay to play. If they didn't, it's because the crowd in America isn't what it used to be.
It's very simple.
The world is changing, and some are holding to what are antiquated sentiments in the way that things used to be. The American boxing landscape has had ample opportunity year after year after year to grow the sport, but the opposite happened. It shrunk.
So where would boxing be right now if a generous benefactor in Turkey El El Sheikh and Riyadh Season did not take interest and make as many cash injections into the sport as they have this entire calendar year? Where would boxing be? Do you think we would have got Better B versus B-Vol? That was going to happen in America.
Please.
Where would boxing be? I say it all the time in video after video. The money that the Saudis are putting up to make fights in the world of boxing compensates for the money that the networks aren't putting up.
So while the American presence was not really felt in the sport this year, the sport overall, world boxing, had a very successful year with many big fights.
Inoue versus Neri was a big fight. Huge in Japan, whether the Americans care or not.
Joshua versus Dubois was huge in the United Kingdom, whether the Americans care or not. That America is not the center of attention anymore, not the focus, but that's all right, because there are other emerging markets that are doing very well.
The United Kingdom, Japan, Australia.
So overall, if I am to surmise the year in boxing, what has been 2024, I think it's been a very good year. Very good.
Good.
Can't complain. A lot of fights we were waiting to see, they happened. And there is that much more to come.
What? I'm doing what you guys want. The best fighting the best also. And I've been trying to do that for years. And it took somebody at 26 years old for me to get in the ring with. That should have been Charlo for so many years.
Yeah, you know,
Canelo, Billy Joe Saunders.
Yeah, for the longest time,
Triple G.
You had difficulty getting opponents.
Yeah, and he had difficulty accepting opponents. There are some fights that didn't happen for Demetrius Andrade. Some didn't happen because the other guy didn't want it, but a number of times Demetrius didn't want it. And they're all on display. The paper trail is there.
The fight with Jermel Charlo that he walked away from at 154. The fight with Lara that he wasn't interested in. He was more interested in Jack Colquet.
How the hell does that work?
The fight with Matvey Kurabov that he passed on. The fight with Yanni Bekalim Kanalai that he passed on. The fight with Zach Parker that he withdrew from with an quote-unquote injury.
And you guys know what I think. I don't think he was injured. I just think he didn't want to fight in the United Kingdom on a Frank Warren show against a Frank Warren fighter.
So that when he ends up opposite the ring, a David Benavidez in his mid-30s, it's because of all the things you didn't do, all the fights you didn't have. You didn't leave yourself with much of a choice.
Obsessing about Canelo Alvarez, focusing only on Canelo Alvarez, it didn't pay off. It didn't pan out because look at you now.
Look at where you are.
It's been over a year, well over a year, since Demetrius Andrade quit on his stool in the David Benavidez fight. He hasn't had a fight since then. He hasn't fought this entire calendar year. I heard that he's a free agent.
Who cares?
There are some who have turned Demetrius Andrade into the patron saint for forgotten boxers, all those members of the Who Needs Ya club, but you don't end up in that club by accident. Some fighters end up there because they're too good for their own good. Some fighters. Demetrius ended up there because of all the fights he never had.
You wouldn't accuse Demetrius of being too good for his own good if you've actually seen him. Didn't he get knocked on his ass by Vanez Martirosyan at 154?
Knocked on his ass again in his super middleweight debut by a journeyman, by Demand Nicholson.
At 168.
If he became a member of the Who Needs Ya club over time, I would chalk that up to all the fights he never had. You couldn't afford to be that picky. You couldn't afford to be that choosy. But American fighters, especially U.S. Olympians, and all their entitlements.
You did it to yourself.
The other day I saw Demetrius Andrade clowning Edgar Berlanga for his performance, in the Canelo Alvarez fight. I saw that Demetrius would like to have a fight with him, but in all likelihood, he's going to exercise the same judgment that Demetrius exercised with so many fighters, with Matvey Korobov, with Yanni Bekalam-Kanalai.
Laura.
Demetrius didn't want to fight them any more than Edgar Berlanga is going to want to fight him, because what does he get out of fighting Demetrius, and what does Demetrius bring to the table? Some people are going to get angry at me for asking that question.
But that's why the guy can't get no fights.
And what's he in now, his mid to late 30s? You didn't build your brand over time. You didn't build up your name. You didn't do anything. You didn't fight anybody at 154, at 160. So when you move up to 168, you're backed into a corner. You didn't have a choice but to fight David, because what the hell else were you going to do? Now, I saw Angelo Leo and Lamont Roach rebuild themselves and rebuild their careers on Pro Box. You know, Angelo Leo used to be a Mayweather Promotions fighter. I believe that Lamont Roach used to be with Golden Boy, and I'm left wondering what was stopping Demetrius this entire calendar year from making the same move that they did. That at some point, you gotta bite the bullet, buckle down, and do the work.
You're not a star. Nobody's gonna roll out the red carpet for you.
If Matchroom and Top Rank and the PBC and Golden Boy and all the major promotional outfits out there have nothing to offer you, what's stopping you from going over to Pro Box and having 1 or 2 stay busy fights in the interim? Because not fighting hasn't helped you.
Angelo Leo went over there. Lamont Roach went over there. Jason Rosario, Jarrett Hurd.
What was stopping him? What was stopping him from going over to Pro Box and having 1 or 2 stay busy fights, inexpensive ones, while he waits for something bigger to roll around? The way it is, you're still coming off a loss to David Benavidez.
What I think is he thinks he's too good to have to do that. He shouldn't have to, or he doesn't want to.
Which is why he didn't. He thinks he needs to be fast-tracked to 6- and 7-figure fights, not having the marquee value for that.
You're finding out the hard way. You're not a 7-figure fighter.
UPS is hiring. So is the Amazon warehouse.
I don't feel sorry for him. You could afford.
You just didn't want to bad enough.
But yeah, I don't think Canelo's beating David. I don't blame him not to fight David. Say, Canelo, stay away from David. Don't do it. Let me get out of it one time. Don't do it. Listen, I'm taller and longer than Canelo. And I don't know if Canelo can. That's a big boy, man. I don't care. The skills is, you gotta really have the right skill set, movement, IQ, sharpness to beat David. Unless David just fights the next biggest man in the 75, it's gonna be a different story. But at 168, that's how you have to be to beat him. Canelo's smaller than me, and I was able to push David around a few rounds, do what I had to do, whatever. But that weight and his length, and he knows how to throw punches and bunches. It's going to be a hard task for Canelo. And then David's not somebody that's going to let up on you either.
Demetrius Andrade can't use himself as a barometer or an example for who Canelo should and shouldn't fight, because they're nothing alike, Demetrius and Canelo.
They're polar opposites.
Where Demetrius is a southpaw, Canelo is an orthodox fighter. Where Demetrius is tall and lanky, Canelo is short and stumpy.
Where Demetrius is not known for power, Canelo is. Where Demetrius is known for movement,
Canelo isn't. Where Demetrius wants to spend a fight on the balls of his feet boxing on the outside, Canelo's likelier to close the distance to fight mid-range to inside. You couldn't find 2 fighters that are more opposite to each other than these two. So when he uses himself as a barometer,
Demetrius can't punch. He's not known for power. Canelo is. Demetrius ain't that durable or that balanced.
why do you think he's been knocked down more times than Canelo Alvarez, in spite of being taller and longer and supposedly the better boxer?
What is he better at?
Not handling aggression, not handling pressure, not handling volume. We've seen that on a number of occasions before he fought David Benavidez. I remember in the Liam Williams fight in the middleweight division, Liam Williams, a lower tier pressure guy, a scrapper, a brawler. I remember he rattled Demetrius's cage. I remembered that he buzzed him and that Demetrius was getting flustered in spots.
Most of this is gonna go over some people's heads.
Some, because they choose to keep looking at Demetrius through rose-tinted lenses that he never actually had good balance. Canelo Alvarez does. A byproduct of being a short, stumpy fighter is a lower center of gravity. Thus, you're seldom going to be off balance.
Where Demetrius often is. Lunging in for shots, trying for shots, looking very awkward when he does it.
He can't use himself as the gauge for how Canelo might fare with David because he's nothing like Canelo. You know, I actually picked David to beat him.
Beat Demetrius.
He doesn't have the style for the job, the experience at the weight, or the power to get David's respect.
And I don't even like David Benavidez, but I still picked David to beat him, where I wouldn't pick David to beat Canelo Alvarez. It's a different fight.
Especially now. If David Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez had that fight now, it would likely be at 168 pounds that David can't make anymore. Moving back down there for Canelo now would likely come at the expense of his punch resistance and his performance.
I've always thought that. Stylistically, I've always thought Canelo has the style for him because Canelo is better mid-range to inside than David. You let those eye-catching shoe shines over stiffs and stationary targets fool you, yeah, you're gonna think David's a monster.
Because you don't know what the hell you're looking at. If you try that same stuff with Canelo, you're gonna get countered. You're gonna get caught in between. And Canelo punches harder than most, if not all, the guys you've fought.
At a weight you can't make healthy anymore. If we are to continue to entertain this conversation at this point in the juncture, when David is already moved up to 175,
they're gonna fight at a weight of Canelo Alvarez's choosing, not David's, because I don't need to tell you who the A-side is and who's in control. Canelo still holds titles at 168, so what we're talking about is a fight at 168.
trying to get back there, he'd get there half dead, and Canelo would finish him.
What might fluster a Demetrius Andrade isn't going to bother Canelo Alvarez, who swapped punches with the best of them. And he's never been knocked down, he's never been knocked out.
You have.
Are we supposed to pretend that Demetrius Andrade is in any way, shape, or form as durable or as experienced as Canelo Alvarez? Don't let this go over your head that Canelo has already fought better fighters than Demetrius.
You're thinking to yourself, well, Canelo's getting older, and he doesn't throw that many punches in a round, certainly not as many as he used to. Is that not a factor?
With David being the bigger, younger man that throws noticeably more punches in a round, is that not a factor?
Quality over quantity.
Manny Pacquiao threw more punches in a round than Floyd Mayweather, but when they fought, who won?
Quality over quantity.
All that volume and all that activity creates that many more countering opportunities for Canelo in the pocket, where I think he'd have the advantage because his punches are shorter, his hooks are tighter, and more impactful.
People always bring up David's size, as if he's going to keep Canelo Alvarez at arm's length, using the jab, moving and punching. No, he's going to bear down on him. He's going to do half the work for Canelo.
That's how he's going to use his size, because he's a pressure guy.
Bottom line.
Demetrius Andrade is no barometer for Canelo Alvarez. And if Canelo and David fought next, yeah, I've still got Canelo.